A typical week of work for a lot of people is you work Monday through Friday or Monday through Thursday, whatever your schedule is, and you have all this sleep loss throughout the week because you never really sleep as much as you want. You always have to rely on your alarm, and you're never able to sleep in. And then once the weekend comes, you can finally recover from all that sleep loss that you had, and you can sleep in again. And this is a typical cycle that most people do for their whole life. But this is a huge misconception. You can never pay off that sleep debt with a good night of recovery sleep. If you base it on the studies, we can never make up for that sleep loss that we accrued. Every day that you do not sleep enough, your body will accrue more and more of this sleep debt. Or in other words, more and more of this adenosine molecule. Again, your adenosine molecule is your body's sleep pressure. So the more that you are awake, the more this adenosine molecule will build up and the more sleepy you will feel. So if you sleep 6 hours a night when you're supposed to sleep 8 hours a night, then your body will still have 2 hours of this adenosine pressure still there. And then the next night, if you do the same thing, you're going to accrue more of this adenosine. And then it's going to build up more and more and more. So if you just try to sleep it off on the weekend, let's say throughout the week, you're sleeping 6 hours a night. So you're working Monday through Thursday. Each day, you're only sleeping 6 hours, and then you try to recover on the weekends. But on the weekends, you're only sleeping about 9 hours. So I'm even giving you one extra day on the weekend. I'm giving you a long weekend. I'm giving you Friday, Saturday, and Sunday to sleep in. And you're sleeping 9 hours on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. So you're sleeping a total of 3 extra hours on those 3 days. But Monday through Thursday, you only slept 6 hours. So each day, you slept 2 hours less than you're supposed to. So that is a total of 8 hours of sleep that you missed out on. So you're missing out on 8 hours of sleep, and you're only paying it back with 3 hours of recovery sleep on the weekends. And this is a huge misconception that a lot of people have. A lot of people think they can simply make up for their week of not sleeping enough by just recovering on the weekends. But we have a lot of evidence, and I have studies that I'm going to show you that prove that you cannot make up this lack of sleep, and your concentration will go down and a lot of other problems will happen. But the sad part is that this is a reality that a lot of people are facing. Most people view work this way, where they have to rely on an alarm clock. If you rely on an alarm clock to wake up, then that's another sign that you're not sleeping enough, because without that alarm clock, you would have kept sleeping. And what happens is, over time, when you constantly have this sleep debt that keeps building up, then you're going to be chronically fatigued, because this adenosine molecule will constantly be hanging around in your body, constantly be telling you that you're sleepy, and you're never going to recover. Now, this might be surprising, but hardly anyone can function at their peak without getting at least 8 hours of sleep in a night. And we have studies that show that if you sleep just 6 hours for 10 days straight, that you're going to be as cognitively impaired as someone who was awake for 24 hours straight. So there was a lot of sleep research done by a guy named David Dinges, and he is a sleep researcher at the University of Pennsylvania. His main question was, how long can humans go, or how long can humans be awake before they start getting cognitively impaired? And his last question he had, this is my favorite part, is how many nights of recovery sleep do people need after a period of sleep deprivation? Or basically, how many nights of recovery sleep do people need to make up for sleep loss? So his study was actually really simple, and it was basically a study of people's reaction time. And this is called the psychomotor vigilance test, or basically PVT for short. So the people in this study were asked to stare at a computer screen and respond to flashes of light. So every time they see a flash of light on the computer, they have to push a button. So the study would only last 10 minutes every day. And this flash of light would come in random succession. So sometimes these flashes of light would be back to back, and sometimes it would take up to 10 seconds before the next flash of light came. And the two things that he was measuring was how long it took you to respond, and also whether or not you would respond in the first place. So in this study, he had 4 different groups. So all of them had a baseline measure where they had a full night of 8 hours of sleep where they could rest normally and then take the test. And then there was 4 different groups split up. So the lucky group was the group that got to sleep 8 hours every single night. And then the other groups weren't so lucky. So one of the groups was kept awake for 72 hours straight. And one of the groups only got to sleep 4 hours a night. and the last group only got to sleep 6 hours a night. So the first thing that he found is no matter which group you were in, sleep deprivation caused a general slowing in people's reaction times. But the most interesting thing he found is people would stop responding at times completely. So they would go with these brief periods where they would just stop responding. And these are called microsleeps. So the real life equivalent of a microsleep is when someone is driving and they don't respond to a life or death situation where someone slams the brakes in front of them or someone runs in front of their car and they don't react in time. So a microsleep is when your brain becomes temporarily unaware of all of its surroundings. And what happens during a microsleep is your body can lose control of all of its motor functions, including if you're driving a car. So you can imagine that if you're driving a car and even for a couple seconds, your body's not able to respond to something, a lot of damage can be done. Every hour in the United States, someone dies in a traffic accident because they were too tired. So going back to the study, unsurprisingly, the group that slept 8 hours a night was the most stable, and they had the fewest errors, and they had the best reaction time. And also not surprising is the group that pulled all-nighters had the worst reaction time, and they had the worst impairment. So after just one night of not sleeping, their missed responses or their microsleeps went up by 400%. Now, the interesting thing here is after the second and third night of not sleeping, their missed responses kept increasing at the same rate, and there was no sign of this plateauing whatsoever. And there were similar measures seen in the other groups, in the 4-hour and the 6-hour group as well. What they found in the 4-hour a night group is after just 6 days of sleeping 4 hours a night, they were as cognitively impaired as someone who pulled an all-nighter. So they had the same 400% increase in missed responses. And again, this showed no signs of plateauing or slowing down. Instead, it just kept increasing at the same rate and actually exponentially getting worse. And actually, by the 11th day in the study, this group that was sleeping just 4 hours a night had the same impairment as someone who was pulling 2 all-nighters in a row. Now, I think the most interesting thing here lies in the 6-hour impairment group. After just 10 days of sleeping 6 hours a night, which most people think is a healthy amount of sleep, after just 10 days, they had the equivalent cognitive impairment as someone who pulled an all-nighter. And again, this only exponentially got worse. This was only 10 days, and this showed no sign of plateauing. It only showed signs of getting worse. Now, this gets really scary when you think about people in high school or other schooling because they routinely neglect their sleep. For example, when I was in high school, I only slept about 4 hours a night. And if I ever got to sleep longer than 4 hours, I would view this as a big reward. Like 6 hours of sleep was a ton to me. Next time you're at work, you can ask people around you how long they think that they sleep a night, or you can assess how long you think you sleep a night. And you'll find that most people will sleep less than 8 hours a night. And the thing is that other studies have showed similar results as well. Other studies have varied the sleep times a little bit. Some studies have even gone up to a 7-hour sleeping group. And these studies have consistently found that no matter what, if you sleep less than 8 hours a night, that you will consistently lower your cognitive ability and you will increase your cognitive impairment. And the longer that you keep this sleep deprivation up, the more that you will be cognitively impaired and the more exponentially that this will get worse. And the worst part about all of this is people did not realize how sleep deprived they were. Throughout all these studies, the participants were asked how they feel and how impaired that they think that they are. And they would consistently say that they think that they're fine when they weren't. So this is the equivalent of someone who's drunk and telling you that they're fine to drive home. Now, what I think the scariest part of these studies is that your recovery nights of sleep did not return you to normal. Even when these participants were given 3 days of recovery sleep. Now, this is sleep where they could sleep as much as they wanted to. Even after the 3 days, their performance did not return to their baseline levels because the brain is simply not capable of doing that. The brain is not capable of going back to its baseline after periods of sleep deprivation. Now think about most people. Most people are constantly in a state of sleep deprivation where they're never sleeping how much their body actually needs. And they're always relying on their alarm clocks and they're always tired because they're never getting that full night of sleep. And then they try to recover on the weekends or recover even after a week of going on vacation or something. But throughout all the years that you've been working or going to school, etc., all the years that you've been depriving your body of getting enough sleep, you can never make up for that difference. And this is part of the reason why so many people are chronically fatigued, because they have this abundance of sleep deprivation and this abundance of this adenosine or this sleep molecule that's building up and never fully gets to go away because you never fully sleep it off. And this is also why so many people are addicted to caffeine, because your caffeine, again, blocks your adenosine receptors. And basically what your caffeine does is it prevents you from being tired. So although it blocks this adenosine from reaching your brain, eventually that caffeine will wear off. And more of this adenosine will keep building up. And then you're going to rely more and more on this coffee. So this is why I think people should really start focusing on their sleep and start making sleep, specifically getting 8 hours of sleep a night, a priority. One of the scariest things about being sleep deprived is how similar it can be to someone being drunk. So a study was done in Australia, and they were basically looking at two different groups. So one of the groups, they basically kept awake, and they wanted to compare after how many hours they kept this person awake to someone who was drunk. So they got the second group drunk to the point of the US legal driving limit. And the way that they tested this was the same concentration test that was done before, where they would look at the responses of light and have to push a button as soon as they see a light. And what they found is after just 19 hours of someone being awake, they are just as impaired as someone who was legally drunk. So if you want to compare this to a real life scenario, someone who wakes up on a Friday at 7 a.m. for work, and then after work, they're ready to go to the bar and go hang out, but they don't want to drink anything, and then they go hang out with their friends until about 2 a.m. That is 19 hours of being awake, but that person is just as impaired as some of his friends who've been drinking. These are the same people that have to DD and drive their friends home, even though they're just as impaired as them. So in the same study, what they found is people's performance started rapidly going down after just 15 hours of being awake. So in that same scenario, it's going to be someone who wakes up at 7 a.m. and then until about 10 p.m. After 10 p.m., then your impairment is going to start rapidly increasing. So just to further show how impaired you can be when you're sleep deprived, there was a study done by AAA, and they were basically seeing the rate of car crashes compared to sleep loss. And they found that just one night of sleeping 4 hours a night, you are 11.5 times more likely to get in a car crash. Now, the thing with this is this relationship between sleep deprivation and getting in a car crash is not linear. It's not that every hour you sleep less, your risk of getting in a car crash is going to go up this much. It's exponential. So every hour that you accrue of sleep loss, you exponentially get a higher and higher risk of getting in a car crash. And just like all the other studies we've seen, that this shows no sign of plateauing, and it only shows signs of increasing and getting worse. So in the same study, they found that if you sleep between 4 and 5 hours a night, you're going to be still 4.3 times more likely to get in a car crash. Now, we've just been looking at sleep loss. We haven't really looked at what happens with being drunk. Now, imagine someone who is both sleep deprived and also drunk, and the amount of damage that that could cause. Now, luckily, we can test this in a safe way. We don't have to actually get people drunk and get them sleep deprived and tell them to go drive on the roads, because one, that would be illegal, and two, that would be very stupid. We can do this with driving simulators. So researchers did this, and they examined 4 different groups. They examined one group that had 8 hours of sleep and wasn't drinking, so that I call that the lucky group. The second group slept only 4 hours a night and had no alcohol. The third group slept 8 hours a night, but they did get drunk. And the fourth group slept only 4 hours and they also got drunk. So not surprising, the group that slept 8 hours a night and wasn't drinking, they had the least amount of errors and they drove the best. Now the group that slept 4 hours a night but did not drink any alcohol, they had 6 times more off-road deviations than the control group, or the group that slept 8 hours. So basically, off-road deviations are when you're driving and you start steering and leaning towards one side of the road. Now, the third group, the group that slept 8 hours a night but also got drunk, they were just as impaired, or they showed the same amount of errors as the group that slept 4 hours a night. So if you go based on the study, if you sleep 4 hours a night, or if you sleep a normal amount and get drunk, you're going to have the same amount of errors. So if you go based on the study, whether you sleep 4 hours a night or whether you get a full night of sleep and get drunk, it really doesn't make a difference in your ability to drive. Now, the fourth group, the group that slept 4 hours and also got drunk, they were the worst. And again, that's not surprising. But what is surprising is how bad they were. They weren't just a little bit more impaired than the other groups. This group had 30 times more off-road deviations than the original control group. So what that means is when you take this sleep deprivation and you combine it with alcohol, these two effects will multiply each other. They will magnify each other. They won't just add on to each other, because we've seen that the group that was sleep deprived, they had 6 times more deviations. And the group that had enough sleep but they had alcohol, they had also 6 times the amount of deviations. But when you combine the two, instead of just getting 12 deviations, you had 30 times the amount of off-road deviations. So this is what can be really deadly when people get behind the wheel. So now I want to compare this again to a real life scenario that is really unfortunate today. Someone who works a long week at work and doesn't get enough sleep throughout the week. And then the last day, Friday comes, and they go out to the bar and they don't drink a whole lot. They just have one drink, but now they're going to drive home. So now not only are they sleep deprived throughout the week, on that Friday when they're going out, they're also staying up past what they normally would. And combine that with them having a drink or two, and now they have to drive home. That person might not even have a blood alcohol content of being legally drunk, but they're definitely going to be impaired, not just from the sleep loss, but from the combination of alcohol. So no matter what way we look at this, we can conclude that our bodies need sleep. And sleep is not something that is negotiable. And we need to get not just sleep, but we need to get enough sleep. Because we can also take this into real life scenarios in a lot of different professions. We have studies that show that doctors who are sleep deprived make more mistakes. We also have studies that show that athletes who are sleep deprived are more likely to get injured. It's really easy for people to get used to being in this chronic state of this brain fog, or being in this chronic state of being tired, because everyone else around them is in the same state where they're constantly getting sleep deprived and they're constantly relying on their alarm clocks and constantly not getting enough of that sleep that they need, so that they think what they're doing is normal. But if you look at the studies and you look at what can happen when you're not sleeping enough, you'll see that it's definitely not normal. And we definitely need to get our 8 hours of sleep a night. Muscle strength is one of the greatest indicators we have for your longevity. So in other words, your muscle strength, or how strong you are, will help determine how long you will live and also how healthy you will live. And some of the best data we have on this is actually your grip strength. So how hard you can actually squeeze something. And